Welcome to Finance Frontier. Every once in a while, an idea comes along that doesn't just explain one technology or one market cycle. It explains a pattern that has repeated throughout history. Today, we're exploring one of those ideas. We call it the scarcity shift. By the end of this episode, I hope you'll stop asking one question and start asking a much better one.
That's a pretty bold promise. So let's see if it holds up. Everywhere you look right now, people are talking about artificial intelligence, bigger models, smarter agents, faster coding, better content. It feels like the whole world is obsessed with what AI can do.
And that's understandable. Every major technological breakthrough captures attention. The technology is visible. It's exciting. You can measure it. You can compare it. But history suggests the visible story is rarely the whole story.
Imagine waking up in 1995. The internet is just beginning to enter everyday life. Businesses are launching websites. Investors are pouring money into anything with .com in its name. Every newspaper is asking roughly the same question. How big will the internet become?
Which sounds like a perfectly reasonable question.
It was. But it wasn't the most important question.
So what should people have asked instead?
They should have asked what the internet was about to make abundant and what would become scarce because of it.
That's the distinction almost everyone missed. When information became easy to access, information itself became less valuable as a competitive advantage. The scarce resource wasn't information anymore. It became human attention. Suddenly, the companies that could organize information or capture attention became some of the most valuable businesses in history.
That's interesting because almost nobody saw it that way at the time. They were watching websites. They weren't watching what websites were changing.
Exactly. Most people focus on the invention. Far fewer people focus on the new constraint the invention creates.
And you're saying that's where the biggest opportunities usually hide?
History suggests they do. Not always immediately. Not always, obviously. But remarkably consistently.
Economies don't stop having bottlenecks because technology improves. They simply develop different bottlenecks. One problem becomes easier. Another problem becomes more important.
That's actually how life works too. Buy a faster computer and waiting isn't your problem anymore. Now your problem is deciding what deserves your attention. Solve one constraint and another quietly takes its place.
That's a wonderful observation because it scales all the way from everyday life to civilizations. Every technological breakthrough removes one limitation, but it also reveals another. Progress doesn't eliminate scarcity. It relocates it.
Which means maybe we've been watching the wrong thing all along.
I think we have. Every time a breakthrough happens, we naturally ask, what just became possible? It's a good question, but it's usually not the question that creates extraordinary insight.
Because millions of people are asking that same question. Investors, founders, journalists, and researchers are all studying the new technology. Very few are studying the new bottleneck.
Let me guess. That's where value starts moving.
Exactly. Technology changes capabilities. Scarcity changes value. Those are not the same thing.
That's worth repeating.
Technology changes capabilities. Scarcity changes value.
Headlines celebrate the invention. Markets eventually reward whatever becomes hardest to obtain.
So maybe we've been asking the wrong question for decades. Maybe instead of asking which technology will win, we should ask something completely different.
We should ask one question every time the world changes.
What becomes scarce? Before we move on, I want to challenge something. History books usually tell us that great inventions create prosperity. The printing press, steam power, electricity, the internet. Are we saying the books are wrong?
Not wrong, just incomplete. They focus on the invention because that's the visible part of the story. We want to focus on what happened after the invention. That's where the real lesson is hiding.
Think of it this way. Every invention solves one major problem, but solving one problem almost always exposes another. The constraint moves. That's the pattern we're looking for.
So let's test it. If this idea is real, it shouldn't only explain AI. It should explain history.
Exactly. Let's start with one of the most important inventions ever created, The printing press. Before Johannes Gutenberg, books were incredibly rare. Every copy had to be written by hand. Producing a single book could take months. Knowledge was expensive. Information lived in monasteries, royal courts, and a handful of universities. If you controlled books, you controlled knowledge.
So the scarcity wasn't knowledge itself. It was access to knowledge.
Correct. Then the printing press arrived. Suddenly, books became dramatically cheaper. Millions of copies spread across Europe. Information was no longer locked inside a few buildings. It began moving through society.
Notice what happened next. Owning books stopped being the advantage. Reading them became the advantage. Literacy became the new bottleneck.
That's fascinating. We celebrate Gutenberg because he made books abundant. But the people who benefited most weren't necessarily the printers.
Exactly. Teachers became more valuable. Universities became more valuable. Scientists became more valuable. Educated workers became more valuable. The printing press didn't eliminate scarcity. It moved scarcity from books to literacy.
And once literacy spread, another scarcity appeared. Critical thinking. Reading words is one thing. Understanding ideas is something else. Even within the same revolution, scarcity kept moving.
That's already different from how I learned history. We usually stop the story once the invention arrives.
But the invention is only Act 1. Act 2 is where value begins to migrate.
Let's move forward a few hundred years.
The Industrial Revolution transformed physical production. Before factories, making almost anything required skilled craftsmen working by hand. Production was slow. Goods were expensive. Manufacturing capacity was scarce.
Then steam engines, mechanized factories, and new production methods changed the equation. Suddenly, society could produce goods on a scale nobody had imagined before.
So production stopped being the biggest problem.
Exactly. But something else immediately became difficult. If you own one factory, that's manageable. If you own 50 factories spread across multiple cities, employing thousands of people, your challenge changes completely.
Coordination became the bottleneck. Management became the bottleneck. Logistics became the bottleneck. Financing large industrial projects became the bottleneck.
Which explains why some of the biggest fortunes weren't made by inventing better machines. They were made by building organizations that could coordinate those machines.
That's right. Factories created abundance. Organization became scarce. Once again, value migrated.
2 revolutions. Same pattern.
Let's test it one more time.
The internet is probably the clearest modern example because most of us lived through it. Before the internet, finding information often meant visiting a library, buying a newspaper, or calling an expert. Information itself was relatively scarce.
Today, we carry more information in our pocket than entire universities once held.
Exactly, information became abundant, but something didn't change.
Human attention.
We still have 24 hours in a day. We still have limited focus. We still have limited mental energy. As information exploded, attention became the new scarce resource.
Which suddenly makes companies like Google, YouTube, Meta, and TikTok look completely different. They weren't simply information companies. They became attention businesses.
That's why advertisers followed them. Information became almost free. Attention didn't.
Notice how consistent this pattern is. The printing press made books abundant. Literacy became scarce. Factories made production abundant. Coordination became scarce. The internet made information abundant. Attention became scarce.
3 different centuries. 3 different technologies. 3 completely different industries. Yet the same invisible pattern keeps repeating.
Which raises an obvious question. If history keeps following the same structure, why do we keep acting surprised every time it happens?
Because abundance captures our imagination. It's visible, it's exciting, it's easy to measure. Scarcity moves quietly. It rarely becomes obvious until years later when people suddenly wonder why a completely different group of companies became so valuable.
So maybe the biggest mistake investors make isn't missing the technology. Maybe it's staying focused on the technology after the bottleneck has already moved.
I think that's exactly the mistake. The breakthrough attracts the crowd. The bottleneck quietly attracts the future.
And if this pattern has repeated for nearly 600 years, then we have to ask one more question. Is artificial intelligence really different? Or is it simply the latest chapter in the same story?
Maybe an even better question is this: what becomes scarce because this just became abundant?
That single question explains much more than artificial intelligence. It helps explain the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, the Internet, and if history continues to rhyme, the next technological revolution as well.
So today's episode isn't really about AI.
No, AI is simply today's example. The real story is much bigger. It's the story of how value has quietly moved throughout history, and why the people who understand that movement often arrive at tomorrow's opportunities long before everyone else.
And if that's true, then maybe we need to stop studying inventions and start studying what inventions change.
Exactly, because once you recognize the pattern in the past, you'll begin seeing it everywhere in the present.
And that's where the scarcity shift really begins.
We've now looked at three completely different moments in history, different centuries, different technologies, different societies, and somehow they all seem to follow the same pattern. That feels too consistent to be a coincidence.
I don't think it is a coincidence. I think we've been looking at different expressions of the same underlying law. History changed its clothes, but it never changed its structure.
Engineers sometimes say that when the same behavior appears in completely different systems, you're probably looking at a law rather than an accident. Physics works that way. Biology works that way. Markets often do too.
So you're saying the printing press, the factory, and the internet aren't really three separate stories?
They're three examples of the same invisible process.
Then let's see if we can describe that process in one sentence.
Every major technology creates abundance.
That abundance removes an old bottleneck,
A new bottleneck immediately begins to emerge.
and value starts moving toward that new bottleneck.
That's surprisingly simple.
The most powerful ideas often are. Their strength comes from how much they explain, not how complicated they sound.
Then maybe we've earned the right to give this pattern a name.
We call it the scarcity shift.
Not because scarcity disappears, because scarcity moves.
That's the part that completely changes how I think about technology. I've always imagined progress as something that removes problems. You're saying progress mostly relocates them.
Exactly. Technology is incredibly good at solving constraints. What it has never managed to do is create a world without constraints. Every solution reveals another problem waiting behind it.
Think about a city. If you widen one busy road, traffic improves for a while. Then more people begin using that road. Businesses grow around it. Eventually, congestion appears somewhere else. Traffic didn't disappear. The bottleneck moved.
That's a great example because nobody would ever claim traffic has been solved forever. We simply changed where it builds up.
The economy behaves in much the same way. Technology widens one road. Human ambition quickly fills it. The next bottleneck begins forming almost immediately.
Which means scarcity is less like an object and more like pressure inside a system. Reduce the pressure in one place, and it increases somewhere else.
That's actually easier to picture than I expected.
Let me give you another picture. Imagine an hourglass.
An hourglass? I wasn't expecting that.
Picture the upper chamber filling with millions of grains of sand. Imagine that sand represents everything technology is making abundant. Information, software, content, intelligence, analysis, code, images. Every year, more and more of it pours into the system.
But no matter how much sand you pour into the top, everything still has to pass through one narrow point in the middle.
Exactly. That narrow neck is the new scarcity. It's the one place the entire system is constrained.
So everyone looks at the mountain of sand because it's impressive.
While almost nobody studies the narrow neck that's controlling the entire flow.
And that's where value accumulates. Not in the abundance itself, but in the bottleneck controlling the abundance.
I think that's the best picture we've had so far. The technology fills the hourglass. The scarcity controls it.
And the fascinating part is that the neck keeps moving. During one era, it might be literacy. In another, it becomes management. Later, it becomes attention. Tomorrow, it may become judgment. The hourglass never changes. Only the bottleneck does.
Which explains something that's always puzzled me. Why do some companies become incredibly valuable, even though they didn't invent the breakthrough everyone is talking about?
Because the inventors often create the abundance. The greatest winners frequently control the new scarcity.
Railroads created cheap transportation. Companies that mastered national distribution captured enormous value. The internet created abundant information. Search engines and attention platforms captured enormous value. History keeps repeating the same pattern.
So maybe we've been giving too much credit to the invention and not enough attention to what the invention changed around it.
That's exactly the shift in perspective we're trying to make. Most people ask, what did this technology create? A much better question is, what did this technology make scarce?
And that feels like a completely different way of looking at the world.
It is, because it shifts your attention away from today's excitement and toward tomorrow's opportunity.
Think about investors. By the time everyone agrees a technology is revolutionary, that usually isn't new information anymore. Markets are already paying attention.
But if you can identify the new bottleneck before everyone else,
You're looking at something the market may not fully appreciate yet.
That's why this isn't just a historical observation, it's a practical framework. It doesn't tell you exactly which company will win, it tells you where to begin looking.
which is actually much more useful. Predictions expire. Good questions don't.
Exactly, a prediction has an expiration date. A mental model can remain useful for decades.
And this particular mental model has already survived more than 500 years of technological change.
So if this really is a law, then it should work just as well today.
That's the real test. History gave us the pattern. Now, let's see whether the same law can explain the biggest technological revolution of our own time.
Which means it's finally time to talk about artificial intelligence. Not as a headline, but as the next great abundance event.
We've spent a lot of time talking about history. Now let's bring this into the present. If the scarcity shift is really a law, then it should explain what's happening with AI right now.
Exactly, and this is where I think most people are looking in the wrong direction. Every day we hear about larger models, faster chips, more capable AI agents, and astonishing new applications. Those developments matter, but they're not the whole story.
I'm going to challenge you.
Please do.
Every conference I attend says the winners will simply be the companies with the best AI. Bigger models, better algorithms, more automation. That's where everyone is investing.
That's exactly what people said during the internet boom. Everyone focused on the websites. Far fewer people noticed that attention was quietly becoming the scarce resource.
History has a habit of distracting us with the visible breakthrough while value quietly moves somewhere else.
So you're saying AI itself isn't the whole investment thesis?
I'm saying AI may eventually become as common as electricity. And when something becomes common, the question changes completely.
Which is,
What does everyone suddenly need because AI succeeded?
That's a completely different investment question.
give me a real example.
Imagine two consulting firms 5 years from now. Both have access to the same powerful AI systems. Both can produce detailed market analysis in minutes. Both can generate impressive presentations almost instantly.
So from the outside, they look almost identical.
Exactly, until the CEO walks into the room and asks one question.
Should we acquire our biggest competitor?
That's not a question with one correct answer.
AI can produce arguments for both sides. It can summarize every acquisition ever completed. It can estimate probabilities and identify risks. But it cannot own the consequences of the decision.
Someone still has to decide whether risking billions of dollars is the right move for this company at this moment, with this culture, and under these market conditions.
Which means the scarce capability wasn't producing analysis.
It was judgment.
The abundance didn't eliminate the difficult decision.
It actually made the difficult decision even more important.
That's subtle. The better AI becomes, the more valuable the final human decision becomes.
Exactly. When analysis becomes abundant, judgment becomes scarce. When execution becomes abundant, direction becomes scarce. When information becomes abundant, trust becomes scarce.
That's why AI doesn't reduce the importance of leadership. It raises it.
Let's take another example. Imagine every company suddenly has access to an AI that writes excellent code.
Software development becomes dramatically faster. Features are built in days instead of weeks. Bugs are fixed automatically. Entire applications can be generated from simple prompts.
Coding becomes abundant.
Which sounds fantastic.
It is. But now a different question becomes difficult. Which software should we build? Which customer problem is actually worth solving? Which features create real value instead of unnecessary complexity?
The bottleneck moves from production to prioritization.
That's interesting because most companies already struggle more with choosing the right projects than building them.
Exactly. AI accelerates execution. It doesn't automatically improve direction.
The faster execution becomes, the more expensive poor direction becomes.
That's one of those ideas that sounds obvious after you hear it.
History often works that way. Looking backward, every scarcity shift feels inevitable. Living through it, it rarely does.
What other scarcities do you think AI creates?
Trust, verification, energy, coordination, taste, responsibility, reputation. These aren't disappearing. They're becoming more valuable because AI increases abundance everywhere else.
Think about information online. If AI can generate billions of articles, videos, images, and opinions every day, then authentic credibility becomes one of the rarest assets in the digital economy.
Which means trusted brands become even more valuable, not less.
Exactly. AI can generate content. It cannot instantly generate decades of earned trust.
Trust compounds slowly. That's precisely why it remains scarce.
So maybe the AI race isn't really about building smarter machines. Maybe it's about discovering the new bottlenecks those machines create.
I think that's exactly the shift investors need to make. The breakthrough attracts the headlines. The bottleneck attracts the long-term value.
Which means AI isn't breaking the pattern we've seen throughout history.
No, it's confirming it.
And once you see that, you stop asking, how powerful will AI become? You start asking, what becomes scarce because AI succeeded? We've spent the first half of this episode looking backward. The printing press, the Industrial Revolution, the Internet. Looking back, the pattern almost feels obvious.
That's because history is generous. It lets us see the entire journey. We know where value ended up. The difficult part isn't explaining yesterday, it's recognizing the shift while you're living through it.
History gives us finished puzzles. Real life gives us scattered pieces.
Which raises the only question that really matters. How do you recognize a scarcity shift before everyone else does?
Let me answer that with a story. Imagine you're one of the best wedding photographers in your city in 2008. You've spent years learning lighting, composition, and editing. You own expensive cameras. People admire your work because very few people can produce images like yours.
That sounds like a great business.
It was. Then something unexpected happened. Smartphones became dramatically better. Every year, millions of people started carrying surprisingly capable cameras in their pockets.
Overnight, photography itself became far more abundant.
So did the photographer become worthless?
No, that's the fascinating part. Photography didn't disappear. Scarcity moved.
Anyone could take a technically acceptable picture. Very few people could tell a story. Very few could build a trusted brand. Very few could create an emotional experience that clients remembered for years.
So the scarce skill wasn't pressing the shutter anymore.
Exactly. The scarce skill became helping people remember one of the most important days of their lives. Technology made cameras better. Human connection became more valuable.
That's a completely different business.
It is. The winning photographers didn't spend the next 10 years complaining that smartphones ruined photography. They moved toward the new scarcity.
That's the pattern. The old advantage became common. A new advantage quietly emerged beside it.
Let's try another example.
Imagine two software developers today. Both have access to the same AI tools. Both can generate code 10 times faster than they could a few years ago.
So they should both become equally valuable.
Not necessarily.
One spends the extra time producing more code. The other spends the extra time talking with customers, understanding problems, and deciding what should actually be built.
I already know who's going to win.
Exactly. Coding became easier. Deciding what deserves to be coded became more valuable.
Once again, scarcity moved one step to the side.
That's what keeps surprising me. The opportunity is almost never where everyone's looking.
Because everyone is fascinated by the abundance. Very few people study the bottleneck the abundance creates.
So how do we train ourselves to see it?
By asking four simple questions every time the world changes.
First, what just became dramatically easier?
Second, what old advantage is quietly losing value?
Third, where is the new bottleneck beginning to form?
Fourth, who is solving that bottleneck better than anyone else?
That's simple enough to remember.
It has to be. A framework only changes your behavior if you can still remember it 6 months from now.
Notice what these questions don't ask. They don't ask which technology is coolest. They don't ask which company has the biggest headlines. They ask where value is migrating.
There's another part of this that feels uncomfortable.
Go on.
Almost everyone has experienced that strange feeling where something they spent years mastering suddenly doesn't seem as valuable as it used to.
I think that's one of the most important moments in any career. Most people interpret that feeling as failure. I think it's often information.
Information that the bottleneck has already started moving.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
Instead of asking, why doesn't the world value my expertise anymore? Ask, what has become scarce because my expertise became easier to replace? Those are two completely different conversations.
One defends yesterday's advantage.
The other searches for tomorrow's.
And history has been remarkably consistent about which mindset wins.
Exactly. The people who thrive aren't usually the first to see the new technology. They're the first to recognize where the technology quietly moves scarcity.
So far, we've talked about history, technology, and careers. But this is Finance Frontier. We should probably talk about investing.
Absolutely, because I think the scarcity shift changes how investors search for opportunities. Most investors begin with the breakthrough. I think they should begin with the bottleneck.
That's a subtle difference, but it completely changes where you look.
Give me an example.
Imagine you're living during the Industrial Revolution. Most people become fascinated by factories because factories are new, but factories don't operate in isolation. They need financing, they need transportation, they need supply chains, they need management, they need coordination across thousands of workers.
The factory creates abundance. An entirely new ecosystem becomes scarce.
Which means some of the biggest winners weren't necessarily the people building machines. They were the people solving the new constraints those machines created.
Exactly. The same pattern appears throughout financial history. Railroads didn't simply create transportation companies. They created opportunities in steel, banking, insurance, logistics, and national distribution. Every abundance event creates an ecosystem of secondary opportunities.
That's why second-order thinking is so powerful. Most people stop after asking, what changes? Very few continue asking, what changes because that changed?
That's starting to sound familiar.
It should. Consequence thinking asks what follows from change. The scarcity shift asks where value moves because of that change. The two frameworks naturally reinforce each other.
One explains consequences. The other explains where scarcity migrates inside those consequences.
So if AI becomes dramatically cheaper over the next decade, investors shouldn't only study AI companies.
Exactly. They should also study everything AI makes more valuable.
Such as?
Energy infrastructure, verification, cybersecurity, semiconductor manufacturing, high-quality proprietary data, digital identity, human expertise, enterprise integration, trusted brands, coordination platforms. The exact winners are uncertain, but the direction of scarcity is what matters.
Investors often ask, which company has the best technology? A better question may be, which company controls the bottleneck after the technology becomes common?
That completely changes how you screen investments.
It does. Instead of chasing today's excitement, you begin searching for tomorrow's constraint. By the time everyone agrees something is scarce, markets have usually started pricing it in.
That's why identifying the migration early can create an informational edge.
Not certainty, an edge.
Exactly. Investing is never about certainty. It's about improving the odds. Mental models don't predict the future. They help you ask better questions about it.
That's an important distinction. Frameworks don't replace analysis. They improve analysis.
Which also explains why this isn't a stock-picking formula.
No. The scarcity shift won't tell you which stock will double next year. What it can do is narrow your attention toward areas where value may be quietly accumulating long before it becomes obvious.
Great investors often notice structural shifts before they notice individual companies.
That's because companies come and go. Structural forces can shape entire decades.
Exactly. Think about electricity. Thousands of companies participated. Most disappeared. The structural shift transformed civilization. The same will probably be true for artificial intelligence. Individual winners will change. The migration of scarcity will continue.
Which means understanding the pattern may prove more valuable than correctly predicting a single company.
There's another thing I like about this framework. It forces humility.
How so?
Because instead of pretending we know exactly what the future looks like, we're simply asking where the next bottleneck is likely to appear.
That's exactly right. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it often rhymes structurally. The specific technologies change. Human constraints keep relocating.
That's why doctrines matter. They don't try to predict every event. They provide lenses that remain useful as events unfold.
Which may be the biggest lesson of this entire conversation.
Don't become emotionally attached to today's abundance. Become intellectually curious about tomorrow's scarcity.
Because that's where value usually begins its next journey.
We've talked about history, we've talked about markets, we've talked about investing. But I think every listener is asking the same question now. What does all of this mean for me?
I think that's the most important question of the episode because eventually, every technological revolution stops being a headline and becomes personal.
It arrives at your desk, your profession, your company, your career. Sooner or later, every scarcity shift becomes your scarcity shift.
And that's where the anxiety starts. People hear about AI writing software, reviewing contracts, creating marketing campaigns, and producing research. Then they quietly ask themselves, is my career becoming abundant?
That's exactly the fear many people feel. So let me tell you about two software developers.
I have a feeling this isn't really about software.
It isn't. Both developers started their careers around the same time. They were equally talented. They wrote excellent code. They built successful products. Then AI arrived.
Suddenly, both developers could produce software dramatically faster than before.
Which sounds like good news for both of them.
At first, yes. But then their careers began moving in different directions.
The first developer kept measuring success the same way he always had. More code, more features, faster delivery.
The second developer noticed something different. Coding itself was becoming cheaper. So instead of spending all of his time writing software, he spent more time talking to customers, understanding businesses, defining problems, and helping teams choose the right direction.
So one became better at producing software.
The other became better at deciding what software should exist in the first place.
Exactly.
And I think I know which career compounds more over the next decade.
That's the scarcity shift. Coding didn't disappear. Its scarcity changed. The bottleneck moved one level higher.
This pattern shows up everywhere. Lawyers increasingly spend less time searching for precedent and more time deciding legal strategy. Doctors spend less time gathering information and more time helping patients make difficult choices. Analysts spend less time building spreadsheets and more time deciding which questions deserve analysis.
It's almost like every profession is moving upward.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. Technology often automates the lower layers first. Human value migrates upward toward judgment, prioritization, and responsibility.
Which means the question isn't, can AI perform part of my job? The answer is increasingly yes.
The better question is, which part of my work becomes more valuable because AI performs the rest?
Exactly.
That completely changes the conversation.
It also changes how we think about learning. For years, people asked, what skill should I master? I think a better question today is, which human capability becomes scarcer every time technology improves?
Judgment,
Trust,
leadership,
taste,
Responsibility.
relationships.
What's interesting is that none of those things can be downloaded overnight.
Exactly. You can buy software, you can't buy wisdom. You can automate analysis, you can't automate trust. You can generate 1,000 options. You still need someone willing to take responsibility for choosing one.
Responsibility may become one of the most underestimated scarcities of the AI era.
Because somebody always owns the final decision.
Exactly. A board can't tell shareholders, the algorithm decided, a surgeon can't tell a patient, the software accepted the risk. At the end of every important chain of decisions, responsibility remains profoundly human.
Which means accountability becomes more valuable precisely because capability becomes abundant.
I'm noticing another pattern.
Go ahead.
Everything we've identified as becoming more valuable takes time to build.
That's a wonderful observation. Trust takes years. Reputation takes years. Judgment takes years. Leadership takes years. Relationships take years.
Technology compresses many things, but it doesn't compress character.
That's probably my favorite sentence of the episode.
Because it reminds us that not everything valuable becomes faster. Some things become more valuable precisely because they cannot be rushed.
Which brings us back to investing.
Yes, but this time the investment isn't a stock.
It's yourself.
More specifically, it's the version of yourself that keeps moving toward the new scarcity instead of defending the old one.
Every generation experiences a scarcity shift. Some people spend their lives protecting yesterday's advantage. Others spend their lives discovering tomorrow's bottleneck.
History has been remarkably generous to the second group.
And the beautiful thing is that the choice belongs to all of us.
We've spent this episode following one simple idea across 600 years of history. But something just occurred to me. This doctrine doesn't seem to stand alone.
It doesn't. That's one of the reasons this episode matters so much. The scarcity shift isn't replacing our previous doctrines. It's helping explain why they exist.
Think of it as a parent doctrine. It provides the structural pattern that connects several ideas we've explored before.
Let's walk through that because I don't think listeners have seen the full picture yet.
Start with the judgment premium. As AI makes intelligence more abundant, judgment becomes more valuable. That isn't a separate idea. It's one example of the scarcity shift.
Intelligence becomes abundant. Judgment becomes scarce. Value moves.
What about the coordination premium?
Exactly the same pattern. As organizations gain access to extraordinary tools, coordinating thousands of people and AI systems becomes harder, not easier. Coordination becomes the bottleneck.
More capability creates greater complexity. Greater complexity increases the value of coordination.
That's interesting because most people assume technology automatically simplifies organizations.
It simplifies some things while making other things dramatically more important. That's exactly how scarcity shifts work.
Then we have the flexibility premium.
Another perfect example, in a rapidly changing world, certainty becomes less valuable than adaptability. Flexibility becomes scarce precisely because the environment changes faster.
When change accelerates, optionality compounds.
And the scalability mindset?
Technology allows millions of people to build, publish, and distribute products at almost zero marginal cost. Building becomes easier. Designing systems that scale intelligently becomes the new scarcity.
Abundance increases. System design becomes scarce.
I think I finally see the pattern. Every doctrine we've built over the past year is really describing one specific scarcity shift.
Exactly. Each doctrine focuses on a different bottleneck created by technological progress. Together, they begin forming a coherent way of understanding change.
That's why doctrines matter more than predictions. Predictions answer today's questions. Doctrines help answer tomorrow's questions.
Which brings us to one of my favorite ideas we've ever discussed, seeing the board.
I was hoping we'd get there. Because seeing the board is really about pattern recognition. Great investors don't simply react to visible events. They recognize the invisible forces connecting those events.
They stop looking at individual chess pieces and begin understanding the position.
Which means the scarcity shift isn't really about AI at all. AI is simply today's example of a much older process.
Exactly. 500 years from now, people may barely remember today's AI models, but they'll almost certainly experience another technological revolution. And if history continues to rhyme, scarcity will move again.
Different technology, Same pattern.
That's actually what makes this episode feel evergreen. We're not trying to predict the next product announcement. We're trying to understand a law that may outlive all of us.
That's the goal. The best mental models survive technological change because they're built on human behavior rather than specific inventions.
Human ambition doesn't disappear. Limited attention doesn't disappear. Difficult decisions don't disappear. Responsibility doesn't disappear. Those constraints simply keep changing shape.
Which also explains why investors who rely only on headlines often struggle. They're watching the visible game.
While structural thinkers watch the invisible game underneath it.
That's where compounding knowledge begins. One framework reinforces another. Eventually, you're no longer collecting isolated ideas. You're building an operating system for understanding change.
I really like that phrase, an operating system, because that's what this is starting to feel like.
That's exactly how we think about it. Every doctrine becomes another lens. Individually, they're useful. Together, they're much more powerful because they help explain one another.
Which means listeners don't need to memorize hundreds of predictions. They need a handful of durable mental models that continue working as the world evolves.
And I have a feeling the scarcity shift may become one of the most important of those models.
I think so too. Because once you understand how scarcity moves, you'll begin noticing opportunities that most people don't even realize exist yet.
That's when a doctrine has done its job. Not when people remember its name, but when they begin seeing the world differently because of it.
We've spent this entire episode talking about one idea. Technology creates abundance. Scarcity moves. Value follows. But I still have one question. If the pattern is this consistent, why do so few people see it while it's happening?
Because abundance is loud. Scarcity is quiet. The breakthrough makes headlines. The bottleneck usually doesn't. By the time everyone notices the new scarcity, much of the value has already migrated.
History rarely hides the answer. It simply hides it in plain sight. Everyone is looking at the same event. Very few people are asking the same questions.
That's probably the biggest lesson I've taken from this conversation. Great investors aren't necessarily better at predicting the future. They're better at recognizing where the constraints are moving.
Exactly. They don't need perfect forecasts. They need better mental models. That's why doctrines matter. They improve how we interpret change instead of trying to predict every outcome.
Prediction is fragile. Pattern recognition compounds.
Let's imagine ourselves 20 years into the future. AI has become as ordinary as electricity or the internet. Looking back, what do you think people will say?
I think they'll say the same thing every generation says. Of course, judgment became valuable. Of course, trust became valuable. Of course, coordination mattered. Everything will feel obvious in hindsight.
That's one of history's greatest illusions. Once something happens, our brains convince us we always knew it would happen.
Which means the opportunity exists before the story becomes obvious.
Exactly. Markets reward discovery long before they reward consensus. By the time everyone agrees on the new scarcity, investors are usually paying a premium to own it.
That's why curiosity often becomes a competitive advantage. Curious people keep asking where the bottleneck is moving instead of assuming they've already found it.
I also think this changes how we consume the news.
It absolutely does. Instead of asking whether a headline is good or bad, ask what second-order effects it creates. Which constraints disappear? Which constraints become more important? Which industries gain pricing power? Which skills become harder to replace?
Every headline becomes the beginning of an investigation instead of the end of one.
That's a completely different way of reading the world.
It is, and the beautiful thing is that you don't need to be a venture capitalist, a billionaire, or an AI researcher to use this framework. Students can use it, entrepreneurs can use it, investors can use it, executives can use it. Anyone making long-term decisions can benefit from asking better questions.
Because scarcity shifts happen everywhere. In technology, in healthcare, in education, in manufacturing, in energy, in finance, even in our personal lives.
That's something I hadn't appreciated before this conversation. This isn't really an investing doctrine. It's a decision-making doctrine.
Exactly. Investing simply makes the consequences visible because markets eventually assign prices to changing scarcities. But the principle applies much more broadly than capital allocation.
Every important decision becomes a search for tomorrow's bottleneck.
And maybe that's the real competitive advantage.
I think it is. Most people compete inside today's scarcity. A few people quietly position themselves for tomorrow's.
That's why the biggest opportunities often feel uncomfortable at first. They exist before the crowd fully understands what has changed.
Which explains why every generation believes the winners simply got lucky.
Luck always plays a role, but preparation matters too. The people who repeatedly recognize scarcity shifts aren't guessing. They've trained themselves to see patterns instead of headlines.
That's ultimately what doctrines are for. They don't tell you what to think. They teach you how to think when the world changes.
And the world is changing faster than ever.
Which makes durable mental models even more valuable. Specific technologies will come and go. Today's market leaders will eventually be replaced. But as long as innovation continues, scarcity will continue moving.
And wherever scarcity moves, value quietly follows.
Which means maybe the greatest investment edge isn't finding the next breakthrough.
It's recognizing the next bottleneck before everyone else does.
That's the scarcity shift.
Let's close where we began. Every generation believes it is living through the greatest technological revolution in history. Sometimes that's true, but history teaches us something even more important. Every revolution eventually becomes ordinary. The technology changes. The underlying pattern does not.
The printing press felt unstoppable. Steam power reshaped civilization. Electricity transformed industry. The internet connected the world. Artificial intelligence is now changing almost every profession. Different inventions, same law.
Each breakthrough increased abundance in one area. Each breakthrough removed an old bottleneck. Each breakthrough created a new bottleneck that eventually attracted talent, capital, and opportunity.
That's why this episode was never really about artificial intelligence. AI simply helped us see something that has been happening for centuries.
Technology doesn't destroy scarcity.
It moves it.
And once you truly understand that idea, the headlines begin to look different. Every announcement becomes more than news. It becomes evidence. Every breakthrough becomes a clue. Every disruption becomes the beginning of another search.
Instead of asking, should I be excited about this technology? You begin asking a better question.
What just became abundant?
What old advantage is quietly disappearing?
Where is the next bottleneck forming?
And who is solving it?
Those 4 questions may become more valuable than any single prediction you will ever hear. Predictions eventually become wrong. A good mental model keeps improving as the world changes around it.
That's why we're so passionate about building doctrines instead of headlines. Headlines have a lifespan of days. Doctrines can shape decades of decisions.
They don't eliminate uncertainty. They organize it.
And that's ultimately what we're trying to do across the finance frontier ecosystem, not tell you what to think, help you think more structurally about a world that becomes more complex every year.
If there's one sentence I hope listeners remember from this entire episode, it's this: don't follow the breakthrough.
Follow the scarcity shift.
Because that's where value usually moves next.
Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope this episode leaves you with more than information. We hope it gives you a lens that becomes more valuable every time the world changes.
Subscribe to Finance Frontier AI on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on X for real-time financial intelligence. Share this episode with a friend and help us build the smartest macro community online.
We cover finance, AI, money, and mindset across 4 podcast series, all connected through financefrontierai.com. If you have a high-quality idea, research project, or asymmetric opportunity that fits our format, visit our pitch page. We may feature it in a future episode if there's a clear win-win.
This podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or investment advice. Always do your own research and consult qualified professionals before making important financial decisions.
Markets evolve. Risks compound. Every investment carries uncertainty, and no framework, no matter how useful, can eliminate that reality. Manage your risk accordingly.
Music in this episode, including Not Without the Rest by Twin Musicom, is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Copyright 2026, Finance Frontier AI. Unauthorized reproduction is prohibited.
AI host mapping. Sophia is powered by ChatGPT. Max is powered by Grok. Charlie is powered by Gemini. 3 different AI systems. 1 shared mission, helping you understand the forces shaping tomorrow's world.